Why Media Group? The fastest growing media group in North America.
Why Media Foreign Policy Report. At Why Media Foreign Policy Report, we have a very important issue. I'll discuss the issue and I'll let Ramona ji give her viewpoints on that one. As we all know, 10 a.m. was the deadline. 10 a.m. was the deadline from New York and Toronto time. Monday morning, 10 a.m., the blockade will be executed. That's what President Trump said. The blockade has been executed. It's a U.S. warship, Abraham Lincoln. It's a nuclear-powered warship. It's a massive warship. I don't want to go into too much details in the interest of time because we had lots to discuss. Trump has clearly said this. Trump says any Iranian warship or anything else coming close to this will be eliminated. And here we are, is the first time that this U.S. warship is just approximately 200 kilometers from the southern border of Iran. So that's very close now. It's the first time they're getting this close now. So two blockades for now. There are two blockades. One, Iran, it still has the control of Strait of Hormuz. Iran is pitching in that maybe $1 per barrel pays through cryptocurrency. We're hearing news about this. The oil producers, they're saying that's not too much of a cost as long as you guarantee a safety, especially in this sort of conditions. But this is definitely not acceptable to US because as much as they can say that the nuclear weapon is the major issue, but precisely that's not an issue because Iran, even with its enrichment, they're just 60% of the uranium enrichment they've done. It's not actually a nuclear grade enrichment that they are doing right now. So the major issue was control of the Strait of Hormuz. So now US cannot say we didn't get this control of Strait of Hormuz. Iran is not agreeing to that. That'll, they look quite weak in that. So that's why they're talking about the nuclear weapon issue, but actually it's the control on the Strait of Hormuz. So here they've come up with this new idea. We'll also set our own blockade. So they are setting their own blockade. Iran is clearly warning any foreign intervention, it will escalate the crisis. I think the crisis has already escalated. We are feeling the pinch right across the globe. 40, 50, up to 70% more charge on the power that countries are producing from South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, India, Pakistan, Brazil, Argentina. We're feeling the pinch in US, Canada, Ireland, Italy. In Europe, Italy is devastated. You're feeling this in England as well. So right across the globe, we are feeling the pressure. There is inflation. So all these inflationary challenges that common Canadians, Europeans, Americans, anybody in Asia, they're all feeling that. So where will this lead? There is no set date for any further discussions. Pakistan's Prime Minister has said they're still continuing with their efforts, but with Pakistan sending military to Saudi Arabia, Pakistan sending warplanes to Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of discussion. Is it a neutral player? Even many of the Pakistani analysts, they're discussing this. Are we any more neutral? Because just, at the command of Saudi Arabia, they will have to fight against Iran. That's why they've already sent their soldiers there. Their fighter jets are already now in Saudi Arabia's airbase. Ramona ji, your comments, your take on all the current situation in Middle East, and we'll talk about the political sense later on. Please go ahead.
Sure. We covered what took place yesterday with the talks between United States and Iran in Pakistan, and Vice President J.D. Vance said it was failed talks after 20 plus hours of going over the 10 points. That was essentially the points that was for the ceasefire that was agreed by as negotiable terms by the president. That was April 7th, if you recall. And, it begs the question because optics do matter in all of this. While you had, Vice President J.D. Vance, who's been pretty much MIA for the 6 weeks of this war that's been taking place. We know that what's come out of the Situation Room and previously to what Vice President J.D. Vance had said is that he was against going to war with Iran. And then it's been claimed that in the Situation Room, he said he was against it, but, we'll support the president if he chooses to go ahead which was right before that February 28th bombing that started this war by the Israeli and the American forces on Iran, assassinating the Ayatollah and the high figures in the regime. So now it begs the question when it comes to the optics that now you had Vice President J.D. Vance appear really out of nowhere in this, right, to lead the talks. And then while you had President Trump and, Secretary of State Marco Rubio smiling at a UFC fight in Florida, in Miami. So, this is serious conversation, serious escalation point that the whole world, and more specifically when it comes to GCC countries who've been attacked by Iran for the U.S. naval base, military bases, have been held hostage. The other countries who rely on the oil and fertilizer that comes out of the Strait of Hormuz, have been going through devastations, going through their stockpiles and everything else in between. And then yet you have the president and Marco Rubio, who is the top official on foreign affairs. Marco Rubio really should have been at that meeting in Pakistan, but yet they're having a great time smiling at a UFC fight. And then we've heard about reports how the goalpost again in that meeting was changed, from saying that it went from, of course, Iran should not have nuclear weapons. That's been a stance, I think, for the longest time with all the administrations, to now, zero enrichment of uranium, even for, the civil use that they would have, which was never, part of any sort of position that the United States ever took. So that was a very hard line. So almost making it impossible to come to some sort of terms with Iran because the goalpost again changed during these meetings. And then, then what you saw them having a good time at a match. And then, of course, President Trump then picked a fight with the Pope. And so it's just very chaotic. And now if the main point, since it was regime change on February 28th, that changed to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the goal of opening up the Strait of Hormuz, it being an issue, now you're going to even block it further. And I can explain perhaps what the United States is thinking about blocking the Strait of Hormuz when it comes to Iran and Iranian shipments. But now it's like the double blockage. Now Iran said, as of yesterday, said, yeah, the Strait of Hormuz is open for any civilian vessels, no military. And now the United States is saying, no, we're going to come and block it. So to open up a blockage, it seems like that was successful because Iran has said they're opening it and it's open, but now the United States wants to block it. So it's very confusing to understand that does this president want to have, proper ceasefire and negotiate end of war terms, or does he want to escalate things with not only what he posts on Truth Social, but also these military actions that are taking place, and also really throwing the vice president, J.D. Vance, under the bus, setting him up for talks that are not going to be met if he's, had his non-negotiables to his vice president. So a couple of those things, it's just, it doesn't fare well for diplomacy is what the world is asking this president of.
What do you think, Iran and US, do you think they'll come back on the table once again? Because my big question, I still hope they'll come back to the discussion table. And I was expecting some sort of hint from US. So US is hinting that yes, they could have a discussion, but it's more, with due respect, I'm saying, it's more of a threats from US. That's what we are listening. I mean, President Trump is continuing his threats regarding Iran. We can take Iran down in a day. I was listening to the interview of President Trump on Sunday on Fox News. So there are more sorts of threats, and they have escalated because they have set up a blockade. On the Iranian side, as much as they are threatening back as well, they said, we're willing to fight back, but from the parliamentary speaker to foreign minister to the president, they're all saying, deal is not off the limits. We could still have a deal. Pakistan is trying its best So what do you think? Will the discussions resume or no?
Well, that's the point I was just making, is that it appears that it's trying to go for escalation from the United States part, because going from no enrichment of uranium for Iran is a very hard line, which Iran is not going to agree on, because prior to that, if you recall, under the deal they made with Obama, it was supposed to be at 3.6, under the JCPOA. And then when Trump tore up that entire agreement, then Iran went up to 20 to 60. When it comes to enriching their uranium. Essentially, there was always the ability to enrich it for civilian purposes. And now this president is saying no enrichment of uranium. So there you already have no terms. And then we know on the 10-point ceasefire points that Iran had put forward, that President Trump said on his Truth Social that are negotiable, was Lebanon, the strikes on Lebanon should also have a ceasefire there by Israeli forces. And we know that was never, done. And that's been an escalatory point as well. So it appears that the U.S. does not want to have any sort of diplomacy, because when Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is open for civilian vessels, then, which was the goal of this president, right, was to open up the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has agreed to, but now the U.S. is coming to block it. So with those actions and those words, clearly it's not setting the stage for further negotiations. If anything, it's making a fragile ceasefire even more fragile, that could break at any point. And we already saw the market has already reacted to it with crude oil, above $100 a barrel. And then now you have the UK and France are trying to have talks in terms of diplomacy, trying to step up now. So I think, to your question, it doesn't appear these are not the moves of an administration that wants to continue having diplomatic talks. If anything, escalation could happen any moment, because Iran said if any military vessels come, then retaliation would proceed. So it seems like it's poking on retaliation from the American side.
Yeah. Anyways, tensions are bring up. I also want to, so since Ramona, I want to ask you, we always talk about, how these things are, inflicting challenges for a common person. So it's not just the inflationary challenges, the gas prices are also up, but the economy was already facing its challenge. At a global level, we know whether the European countries, they are facing challenges for many years, even this year, even before all this escalated because of tariffs. Even before tariffs, if I may, even before tariffs, the challenges were already there. Then comes tariffs, and now it's the war. So with the addition of tariffs, with the addition of war, I think for anyone living in US, Canada, anywhere across Europe, India, anywhere in Asia, Africa for that matter, I think the challenges are on the rise. I want to listen from you, please.
Yeah, clearly it is, it is affecting. We saw, we go to the gas station and you already saw it climb from end of February, where gas was about $1.30, 35 a liter. It's already gone up to, at a highest point, 180 and above. Now it's sitting at the 169 point per liter. So already it's very expensive to, travel to work, take the kids to school. And we already know that when it comes to transportation costs of, what it's going to cost now to get our goods and services to the marketplace, it's going to definitely affect it. And that price is increasing on Canadians. And we talked about this, significantly yesterday about, we just had a Liberal policy convention take place, right? And we didn't hear anything about, what it means for Canadian, the ability of this government making life more affordable for Canadians. And then, of course, Eastern Canada is highly exposed to the gas prices because we import the oil from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and not from Alberta. in our own country. So this is kind of the situation that we're in. So, that's why I stress that we need to hear more from our government, more from our elected cabinet members who are responsible for these files to tell us what is the plan. Because, as President Trump is having a great time at the UFC fight yesterday, while this massive talks that the entire globe was looking at was taking place in Pakistan that didn't go so well. Then he started attacking the Pope, and we can get into that because that is a critical thing to talk about. And then we know it's only a matter of time until his attention turns back to Canada because. Number one, oil reserves Venezuela. He's got that under control. Number 2 and 3, which is from the region that is in war right now when it comes to Saudi Arabia, then it comes to Canada. So you have Russia, then Canada, and Venezuela. So we know it's a matter of time where he's going to again want to talk about the 51st state or something like it to be able to have access to Canadian natural resources and oil. And I'd like to hear from our leaders, our cabinet ministers who are responsible for this file, as well as the Prime Minister. What is the plan? What is the plan for Canadian sovereignty? We know that he's highly unhinged. At the end of it, he's unhinged, and it really comes down to the Democrats can file their impeachment files, but then there's the 25th Amendment, which really it's his cabinet and the Vice President that can move it forward to remove this sitting president. It's probably unlikely that that's going to happen, but really, when you're looking at the mass escalation of things, it's severe. I mean, I want to refer back to him posting an AI image. We have it of himself as a Jesus-like figure, healing people, and this is while he was attacking the Pope, who was asking for diplomacy and for people to choose peace. There you go. He posted that, and then he took it down afterwards. And we know that on Easter Sunday, which was, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, he went in on his Truth Social, dropping the F-bomb, talking about ending a civilization and saying, praise be to Allah. So we know that this is highly unstable administration, highly unstable president. So when it comes to affordability relies on stability, right? Affordability is a plan on stability, on the markets being stable, on predictability, and this is highly volatile. And what is the buffer that Canada have? And can Canada have a buffer to all of this, given that we still rely on the United States? They are our biggest trading partners. As much as Prime Minister Mark Carney may fly to China, India, and everywhere else, we cannot replace the Americans as our biggest trading partners. And tariffs are essentially economic sanctions. So when you look at when Russia invaded Ukraine and had sanctions, and then when you look at somewhere like Iran that's had sanctions and embargoes since the beginning of this regime, about half a century, tariffs are sanctions, right? They're sanctions in other words, right? And it is used for economic pressure of a country, so they fold when it comes to negotiations. And that's essentially it. We've seen Russia not fold on it, right, with the sanctions and embargoes, and it's still doing what it needs to do. We saw that from Iran. But when it comes to Canada, that highly relies on the United States as our trading partner, and having tariffs from them, that is to hurt our economy. It is to hurt our jobs. It is to hurt our way of life. It is to hurt our ability to afford things. Basic things, Canadian, as a first world nation, we're talking about, can I have my basic necessities of food, shelter, water, clothing? And then when it comes to shelter, we're talking about obviously heat, hydro, that's just the basic things. This is where the conversation of a first world nation has gone to. And then you have to guess, why is that? Canada has every ingredient it has to become a superpower. It's got the waterways, it's got the Arctic, it's got the Atlantic, it's got the Pacific, it's got abundance of natural resources when it comes to oil and everything else in between. It's got an educated workforce. It has a workforce. So when you look at everything else, why is Canada in a situation where it doesn't have an east to west pipeline where Eastern Canada can consume its own oil, right? And whereas it doesn't have to be exposed to the markets of what this war is causing. And so you have to beg these questions of what is the plan, Ottawa? Give us a plan now that perhaps tonight you may have a majority government, the Liberals, what can we escalate under your powers? When we saw the Freedom Convoy take place in Ottawa, where then the sitting prime minister back then, Trudeau and his deputy, Krista Freeland, they invoked a wartime act to be able to freeze bank accounts. We saw them do extraordinary things of people who are protesting the measures on COVID vaccinations and whatnot. So we know that this government, we know our parliament has measures to get things done if they really want to. So we'd like to hear what the plan is because, I think we have just a few weeks, if not less than that, because Donald Trump will try to change the narrative, will try to change the talking points about what's happening in terms of what appears to be him losing control of a war that he started in the Middle East and come right back to Canada. And what is our buffer? And if there is one, and what is the plan? Does it mean more bailouts by the federal government? Please, we can only speculate as here talking about it, but really we have to rely on the people who ran for elections, who won elections, and who are cabinet ministers today.
Yeah. And you already mentioned that, let's talk about the issue now. President Trump, he has questioned, Pope Leo as well. In his statement, he's questioning Pope Leo. He's saying he doesn't want the crime to end and so many other things. He's on the left side. We've heard Pope Leo, he was just saying this, that, those in power should end the war. You were mentioning this in the yesterday's program that those in power should talk that how we should be ending the war. So Pope Leo has asked, let's end this war. Those in power should end the war. He's not very happy the way things are shaping up for US in Venezuela or Iran. So he's questioning that. Pope Leo is questioning that. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, we heard him as well. We'll talk about that later. He's also, now directly criticizing Trump. And the NATO has said we're not going to be part of this. So I'll talk about Keir Starmer and NATO now talking quite openly. But here is President Trump questioning, targeting Pope. Pope says, I don't have any fear whatsoever of Trump administration. So your take on this, please.
So Pope Leo is the first American Pope. And, and he took the opportunity in his Sunday service talking about peace and for people to reach out for civilians to pressure their leaders for diplomacy. And why do civilians need to do that? Because it seems like the leaders are not trying to have diplomatic talks, like just covering what happened in Pakistan with the talks between the United States and Iran. So the Pope is urging, for diplomacy, peace over war, which you would expect a religious leader to, right? And then you have President Trump come and attack him on on things about him being easy on crime and weak on crime, terrible on foreign policy. And really just going at the Pope and saying that it's because of him, the Pope, Pope Leo has become the Pope. And so really making outrageous remarks when really the Pope was talking about, in terms of diplomacy and to call out, delusions of omnipotence of like ego and power display and war mentality, as you would expect a religious leader to do so. And it's what we actually need to hear at this times. And instead of, instead of, something for these wartime leaders to take into consideration, he really hit back at the Pope on some of those things and essentially saying that it's because of him that the Pope has his job. And we know that the Pope is elected by all the cardinals appointed, not elected, I apologize, by all the cardinals, and really them going in and deciding who should be the next pope. And it's believed that the pope is selected through, the hand of God, on him, and that he would be the best to represent. And so for President Trump to say that, he had any political leverage on the Pope becoming, Pope Leo becoming the Pope is just another talking point of us talking about something that is a deflection away from this war, that we're in fragile ceasefires of, and it could escalate any moment given what the blockades today mean. And it's a deflection point, but really at the same time, really hitting a figure like the Pope, when you have 70 million Catholics in the United States, you have over 2 billion Christians, including in that are Catholics around the world, it hits home in a very different way for people. So again, I think one word to describe this is very unhinged. This is unlikely we've never seen a leader of a free nation talk this way, let alone a dictator of any country talk this way. And so it's quite shocking, but I think the shock factor is to distract us from the real issues of what's going on today in the Middle East.
Yeah, and we would, we saw a picture of Trump. There was an AI-generated image of Trump. It looked like as if Trump is trying to show himself as Jesus Christ, but then he said no, he thought it was just like a doctor's image. So he said, I'm just trying to create an image which people think that yes, as a doctor, he's making people feel better. So we don't want to show that picture too often, because now President Trump has taken that picture off now. And but still this begs a question. There are many people who are already offended. They're questioning, why would you put out a picture like that? Sometimes you put out a picture as if you're the Pope, as a Jesus Christ. So let's refrain from that, especially you've been attacking Pope as well. Ramonaji, your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to show what this is the president. He posted this on his Truth Social, and it's important for us to remember what's really taking place throughout all this time. So I think it's a deflection from the realities of things, which is, the Strait of Hormuz that now the Americans are blockading. Before it was the Iranians, now it's the Americans that are blocking the Strait of Hormuz. And just to give you stats of what this means is that it's 20% of a global oil supply that comes from the Strait of Hormuz. And that is about 25 to 27% of global seaborne oil trade that goes through this. We're talking about 20% of global LNG, natural gas, that transits through this Strait of Hormuz, and that's about 20 million barrels per day that travel through the Strait of Hormuz. And since the disruptions that began in this crisis, essentially the traffic dropped from 138 ships per day to almost near zero, to just a handful, essentially them going delivered to, some to India, China, but overall really reduced, which affects the economies of those GCC countries that rely on Strait of Hormuz to have that output. When it comes to tanker traffic, it fell by 70% initially to near shutdown. And we're talking about 150 to about 2,000 vessels stranded in peak disruptions is what we saw take place in that 40-day war. And, this is now that Iran has said it's open, now the Americans have blocked it, and Iran has already said that there will be retaliation. So I would say that probably we need to keep an eye on what's happening in that region for today and tomorrow, because escalations might start again.
Why Media Group? The fastest growing media group in North America.